seriously, it's a pleasure to have you on. I know you invited me on your podcast. I think it's a little bit over a year now, right? And I think the first conversation we had was very like quote unquote professional. And I think we both quickly picked up on the fact that neither of us like to act too professional. And from there, we've developed a pretty good relationship, man. And I appreciate you tremendously for taking time to speak with me today. I'd love to know a little bit more about you and hear about your background, how you got into bodybuilding, how you got into the field of nutrition, and we can start the conversation there.
Oh man, where do I start?
Very
So
beginning, very beginning.
when I was in high school, I wouldn't say that I was the greatest student. Could say I honestly barely remember anything that I learned from high school. It wasn't really until I found nutrition that in college where I started doing that and where I was like, wow, I'm really interested in this. I'm fascinated. But rewind a little bit, pre-college, I I wasn't doing well in school. I wasn't really doing much of anything. I was getting in a lot of trouble. And at some
And
point, I had reached out to my I went over to my social studies teacher in my senior year of high school. I was 17, and I said, "Hey, man, I just want to get really big so I can beat people up." And he was like, "All right." And he was a big martial arts guy, big into Arnold Schwarzenegger and bodybuilding. And he's like, "All right, I'll write you up a workout routine, but you got to promise me you're not going to beat anybody up." So, and I was 17, 5'11", 125 pounds. So I was very small, but I realized quickly when I got into the gym that I grew very quickly. I responded really well to resistance training, and I started to surpass my friends. And there was one day in particular that I remember like it was yesterday. I walked into a 7-Eleven and I saw on the magazine rack Troy Alves on the cover of Flex magazine. And I took I was like, I want to immediately out loud. I shouted, I want to look like that guy. And I just went from there. I started reading about bodybuilding. I started getting into nutrition. I started really writing my own programs. And from there, I want to say maybe about 4 or 5 years later, I had grown and developed into the person that competed in my first INBF bodybuilding competition. And it just continued from there. And then that encouraged me to do more in school. And it was interesting because the discipline that I learned from bodybuilding, it's funny. My mother used to always tell me, if you took the energy that you applied to bodybuilding and you applied that to school, you would do very well. And that's ultimately what I ended up doing. And now here I am today, getting my master's in nutrition and becoming a licensed dietitian and still into bodybuilding, but I've kind of shifted my focus tremendously from my competitive days to where I am now.
yeah, that's actually something I want to touch on a little bit in this conversation here today. But that's a really interesting story, man. Like similar to you, I think I've shared this with you. Like I was a super shitty student growing up, like horrible. And I think a lot of those issues didn't come from the fact that like I didn't like school or I was bad at school. I think it started from like issues at home with parents and just like an unstable home environment that then like contributed to me misbehaving in school perhaps. And then I would misbehave in school and get in more trouble at home, and it kind of just like was a spiraling type of situation there, right? But similar to you, man, I've always been the type of person that like I'm not interested if I'm not interested in something, I don't put any focus or attention into it, even if there's perhaps like repercussions, which isn't the best character trait. But on the flip side of that, if I like something, I'm 100% in. So I never did really well through high school either. I fortunately was accepted to into college at Florida State through a program that was for like first generation college students because neither of my parents went to college. My mom did, but not in the US. My dad dropped out of high school. So the requirements were way lower. And thankfully, I got into college. And then even like freshman, sophomore year of college, I didn't do all that well um, because I was just partying. It was the first time I was on my own, didn't really have like a sense of responsibility for school. And then, like, no joke, I started taking chemistry courses, started taking nutrition courses, biochemistry, metabolism. And then I was like, oh shit, this is really cool. And that's pretty much how it went. And then I was just more applied because I just liked it more. So it's funny to hear that you have a similar story there. I really wanted to ask you, since we're talking about this in terms of taking the principles that you learned from bodybuilding and applying those to other aspects of your life. I wanted to ask this question because I feel like oftentimes so many people think that bodybuilding or lifting weights is such a like bro thing or like macho thing to do, right? Where it doesn't really require much. You're just lifting weights because you only care about the way you look. And sure, perhaps we all start there. But could you perhaps expand a little bit on how bodybuilding and being dedicated to transforming your physique has positively impacted other aspects of your life?
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the biggest things that I learned to work hard,
Yeah.
and I learned that the limits that we place on ourselves are exactly that, right? Like the limits that we think that we have, we can go well beyond those limits. And, for example, and I posted this on my story the other day talking about how I'm training for a bike ride right now. I'm doing a century bike ride, and I did an hour of intervals, and then I followed that up because I'm also in a calorie deficit. I'm trying to lose some weight. So I followed that up with 30 minutes on the stairs. And from minute one on those stairs, I wanted to quit.
Yeah.
And I think it's that perseverance that you get from the sport of bodybuilding that no matter how hard and how difficult something gets, there is a light at the end of the tunnel, regardless of whether or not you can actually see it.
Yeah.
It's there. And the work that you put in now, if you kind of, and this is something that I talk about with my coaching clients, is that there's immediate gratification and there's delayed gratification. The immediate
Mm.
gratification would be I eat something that makes me feel good in the moment.
Yeah.
The delayed gratification is I'm doing something with a greater purpose and I'm going to feel a whole lot better with the return on what I do down the road
Mhm.
and what I achieve down the road. Does that make sense?
Of course.
So that's really a huge piece. And then the other piece is just consistency and doing something over and over again and practicing something and refining it and getting better and realizing that you may suck at a lot of things initially when you
Yeah.
start, right? And that's okay. But when you consistently do something over and over and over again on a consistent schedule, I think time management is one of the big pieces when it comes to bodybuilding is that you have to be able to manage because you're still working full time. You're not doing it as a career. I mean, some people are and they're fortunate to be able to do so. But if you're not, you still have to fit in your work, your education, your family obligations, and all of these other things while you're still participating in the sport of bodybuilding. So it really teaches you a lot about time management.
Yeah, yeah, certainly. I think yeah, I did. I did make an episode on like all of these skills that lifting teaches. I think it was one of like the first episodes that I released. But people don't realize that, right? The skill of understanding the importance of delayed gratification is so important because most things that are worth accomplishing in life require you to understand the importance of delayed gratification, right? Whether it's your career or improving a relationship with somebody or really anything, like we don't really get immediate results. And I think one of the reasons why people do struggle so much to achieve particular goals in whatever domain it is in their life is because they don't understand delayed gratification. Because, like you mentioned, if you simply just stay consistent, and I guess these are principles that apply to our clients who are trying to lose weight or whatever, right? If you simply just stay consistent, you don't have to be perfect. Show up every day. Some days are going to be better than others. Some days might be a lot worse than others, but as long as you try your best, put forth effort, and just do that every day, you get results. But it's really hard to be okay with that. Like to be okay mentally with putting in work today, not seeing any results today, not seeing any results tomorrow, and trusting the process, right? So that's one incredibly beneficial aspect of training your body physically, right? Mental fortitude. I think it also builds a tremendous amount of what's the word I'm looking here for confidence, right? Confidence that you can actually achieve difficult things. And I've talked about these things on social media a couple times And people mention the fact that it doesn't have to be lifting. It can be any hard endeavor, like learning an instrument, for example. And I agree to an extent, but I can't think of anything that is both as mentally challenging and physically challenging as lifting weights, transforming your body, staying consistent with lifting, right? Because the physicality of it is, I think, a very important component. And I'm saying this as somebody who spent 8 years of my life trying to get really good at playing the guitar. And I used to practice every single day, and I was super into music. I used to play the saxophone. I would play 3 or 4 hours every day. And yes, it's difficult, but it's difficult in different ways. And I don't think it teaches you those skills to the same extent because there is something about taking your body through something that's very, very rigorous that teaches you certain things and gives you certain skills that perhaps learning another difficult skill doesn't. So I'm really happy that you shared those. I also wanted to talk about, and this is a conversation that you and I were having the other day. How has your transition been from being a competitive bodybuilder to now not being a competitive bodybuilder, undertaking other physical endeavors, perhaps prioritizing other things more like your education and your career? How has that been mentally in terms of what does that shift feel like? Because and the reason I want to talk about this is because whether it's going from bodybuilding to not bodybuilding or whatever transition it is that people undergo in their life, when you identify with a particular thing or something is part of your identity, and then you start to shift your focus towards something else, it could be really difficult, right? Especially if people say stuff or you have negative conversations in your head, it can be really difficult to be okay with that change. And I think you're navigating it really, really well. And I'd love to hear from you. What has that shift been like?
Yeah, so what you bring up is true. It's not it's a very difficult shift. It's something that you're like, I want to do this and I want to because I didn't always just want to be the big meathead or perceived in that way, right? Always knew I have more in my brain and I have a lot more to offer. And I'm very capable of a lot of things. And it's difficult though, because like you mentioned, you identify as something, right? I have like this kind of alias of the big Cito is what people would call me. And I'm just the biggest guy in the gym. And you go from that to, okay, well, now as I get older, through my bodybuilding, I've seen some lab work changes that were unfavorable, especially in the off season, not so much in the on season, but in the off season where now as I learn more about the human body and through my master's training that I start to realize that, okay, well, what can I do for longevity?
Yeah.
And how can I just focus on not only living longer, but also living a better quality life as I age? I think that that's very important. And I don't think that that's something that you really think about when you're in your 20s and you're throwing around weights in the gym. You're more so concerned with, I don't know, it could be vanity. It could, for me, it was never girls. It was always, I just want to get on the stage and be the best at it that I can. But you start to shift in your mindset and it's very difficult because there are moments where I'm in the gym and I'll see someone who is just jacked and I'm like, man, I can look better than that guy. Come on. But you know,
Yeah.
it's a difficult transition and it's something that you have to kind of constantly remind yourself and condition your mind to, okay, well, I'm doing other things now and I am achieving in other areas and it's okay. I don't know any other way to describe it. It's other than hard.
Yeah.
Psychologically, it weighs down on you because you have gone through your life identifying as a certain person for 10, 15 years. And then all of a sudden you are trying to shift and you have to portray yourself to the public and everybody around you as a different person too. And you really have to grow into and become that person that you're trying to become.
Yeah, dude. Like you mentioned, it's a transition. It takes time. It's difficult. But I think one really important thing that you mentioned is as long as you are pouring yourself into something else that you care about, your identity slowly starts to shift as well, right? And you remind yourself that you are achieving in other domains in your life that you weren't before, right? Like you're achieving and a lot more and you're having a lot more success with your education and your career, perhaps currently now than you were before. And I think reminding yourself of those things when you're going through a tough transition is really important. I've experienced something similar 2 times in my life. One is right now, which I'll share, which is something silly. Um, but before, and I've shared this previously, is for me, when I was going through my PhD, my entire training was to be an academic, right? Like, for people that don't know, the reason you do a PhD is you're being trained to be a professor, to be a researcher. That is what your training is in. So for 4 years, I had this idea that I was going to be a researcher. I was going to be well known for the science that I put out. I was going to be well respected in the academic circle. And then, like, the more and more time I spent in that environment, I realized I didn't want to be in that environment. And that's when I started picking up coaching and doing online stuff and all that stuff. But shifting was really difficult because in many aspects I felt like, oh, I'm overqualified to do some of these things. Oh, some of my peers are going to make fun of me because I did my PhD for nothing. Like, I felt like I went to school for no reason. All of those are like not like actual, they're not factual, right? Because at the end of the day, like, the skills I learned are very transferable and it's helped me tremendously, and my credentials help me with my career now. But it was just this idea of like, man, why did I get a PhD if I'm not going to use it for anything? And not only that, in my eyes, I was an academic, right? I was a doctor. Like, I wanted to be respected in that way. And I was like, man, if I just coach people and help them improve their body composition and that's all I'm doing, like, I feel like some of the stuff that I did was a waste, and I'm completely wrong with that. I don't feel like that anymore, but it was, I had those feelings, I had those strong feelings at the beginning. And now the more and more I do what I'm doing now, the more I put time and effort into getting better at it, the more I see them that I'm actually getting better and proficient at what I'm doing now. I'm really happy, right? And I think it's just a transition period, man, that people go through that is really difficult. The other thing I was gonna share, and this one's silly, but it came to mind when you mentioned that you'll see dudes at the gym and you're like, "Man, I could look better than that, or I could be bigger than that." It's, I've always loved lifting, but I used to be obsessed with basketball. And when I was 18, 19, 20, I used to play, and even in high school, I used to play probably, I don't know, 2 or 3 hours of basketball, like 4 or 5 times a week. I would finish classes, I'd finish school, and I'd go to the courts and start playing basketball, and I was really good. I loved playing basketball. And then I just stopped playing basketball throughout graduate school, partially because I wanted to prioritize lifting in my education more. And the reason why I wanted to prioritize lifting more is because my knees and ankles were always hurting from basketball and all that stuff. And I was like, I'm done with this. So I stopped playing. So it's been probably 4 or 5 years since I actually played basketball intensely. And my wife's cousin's husband is a pastor at a church here in Tampa, and they do a church league, basketball league. And of course, he calls me. He's like, "Hey, Joey, you want to play?" And I'm like, "Hell yeah, I'm playing in the league, right?" So I've been super excited to get back into basketball now. And we just had our third game of the season yesterday, but I'm so out of shape, and I'm far from being like the best person on the court, where I used to be like always the best dude on the court. And so now I'm like, man, I want to get the ball, but I know I can't do anything with the ball the way I used to. My ankles hurt, my knees hurt. I can barely run back and forth. And it's so tough because in my head, I'm like, shit, I want to get back into that. I want to be known as the best person on the court. Um, and those thoughts are really difficult to deal with, man. But like you mentioned, understanding that that's not the person I am anymore, and framing it that way is really important.
Yeah. I mean, I'll say this, and something that you brought up kind of makes me think about something that I often think, and I think about this. You're familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right?
Mhm.
So it's a pyramid. The bottom of the pyramid is like basic security needs, like it's the human needs, the basic security needs: food, air, water, shelter. Um, then I need a place to live, and so on and so forth. And then you get to the top, and you get to the top of it is purpose. And I think that's what I often think about, because with bodybuilding, it was, this is my purpose. I want to be a
Yeah.
professional bodybuilder. Who doesn't, right?
Yeah.
And then you start to realize that when you do shift and you develop that sense of purpose in something else,
Mhm.
I think human beings just need to be able to progress in things, or at least I do. You need to be
Yeah.
able to progress in what you're doing and continually get better and better and better and go through the hardships of that. and you need to be able to grow and develop into what you want to become, whether that be in bodybuilding or that be in your education or your career. And that I think is what it has allowed the transition, is that I've accepted that I'm going to continue to develop and grow. And that's the exciting part of it. It's not of being in a certain place in your
Yeah.
career or in your education. The most exciting part is, although it's difficult,
Yeah.
the most exciting part to me is the journey of getting there and watching myself grow. I mean, for
Yeah.
example, my career, I got on social media really in 2020 after the
Yeah.
pandemic hit. If I look at my social media content from back then and I
Yeah.
compare it to now, and there's something that I posted on a video the other day. I posted a follow button that was a graphic that had a transparent background, and I was like, man, I'm so proud of myself because I didn't know how to create that 2
Yeah.
years ago or
Yeah.
3 years ago. So with that being said, I think one of the most important things in anything that you do is that you're always growing, developing, and that is the most fulfilling feeling to me. And that is what has allowed me to transition into who I was then and what I did then and who I am now and what I'm doing now.
Yeah, man. For me, one of the feelings that bothers me the most is stagnation in like any aspect of what I'm doing, right? Like I've always jokingly said I'm the worst employee because an employee coming from like a 9 to 5 job where like you're just doing this thing every single day and there's no room for growth. And I've had jobs like that in the past and I'm just like not motivated to work whatsoever. Because the way I think about it is like, if I work hard or don't work hard, the reward is the same. So why work hard? And it's not a good mentality to have in many aspects. But what really drives me, I think, similar to you, is the ability to make progress and get better at whatever it is that I'm doing. Right? It's not even like the thing; it's the fact that you can get better. Right? And it's funny because one of the things I really like doing is playing video games on my off time with my buddies, and I'll only play games that are skill based where you can actually get better. And it doesn't matter like what the game is. It's the fact that like, oh, if I play it, I will be better than I was the week before. And I think that's also what's the phrase? A double-edged sword, right? Because there's positives to that because it keeps you moving forward and it keeps you driven, but it can also uh for one, like contribute to having like an addictive personality when it comes to certain things, right? Because I do find myself in that fashion. But also it's hard to like know when it's okay to just chill back and not necessarily always be needing to progress towards something, right? Have you watched the new Arnold documentary on Netflix?
I have not. I just saw it. I just came across it the other day, yesterday, and I didn't even know that it was on there. I haven't seen it. No.
Dude, it's great. It's 3 episodes, and it's about what we were just talking about, right? So, first episode is about his bodybuilding career, how he got to the top of bodybuilding, and then he was like, "Well, this is boring now. What's next?" And then he was like, "I'm gonna be the best actor." And then it's episode 2, how he progressed in his acting career, and then he was literally the most famous actor in the world. And it's like, "Well, this is boring. What's next?" Well, he cared about politics. Like, "All right, politician." And it was just really cool to see his transition because what he was mentioning is very similar to what we're talking about, to where he was only motivated by the ability to get better. And if he was already up top and like couldn't get better, he was like, I don't really care about this anymore. Which is really interesting because I feel like a lot of people, once they get there, they want to stay there. Right. And then that's where you see bodybuilders or whatever. I think sports is a really good place to see this happen. But it's like the person's at the top and then they stay there for a little too long, and then towards the end of their career, they kind of fall off, and then they're remembered for, like, the end of their career versus, like, the highlight of their career, unfortunately, right?